we think we have a greater responsibility now than ever to try and reach and serve and be relevant to those communities. I'm sitting next to somebody, I don't know who they are, but we're having the same experience. It happens to be going through this artist, but then reflected back to us, elbow to elbow with that person. It's what the importance of convening community is all about. And then we get to talk and consider, what did we just see? What did we experience? What was that like for you? The same as with film, too. Our radio station is so important to us because we get to mix and create this wonderful stew of culture together. They're both very human.
Welcome to What Works, where nonprofit leaders share real stories about what makes impact possible and their organizations thrive. I'm your host, Marla Moody. I'm a transformational leadership coach, an author, and speaker. After serving 3 decades in the nonprofit sector, I have a passion to see nonprofits thrive because when nonprofits thrive, communities thrive. I have the pleasure today of interviewing David Fischer. He's the president and general manager of KNKX Public Radio. Today, we're going to talk about a really important topic in light of how we work at Healing Society, how we bring it together. What's unique about David is his passion for what he does and his passion for people. So, David, please come and tell us what works. Welcome.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate being here and joining you and your audience, Marla.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this time. How did you get to be part of public radio?
I never expected that to happen, I think is my first answer. And, I've spent the vast majority of my career, about 35 years, in the performing arts, working first as an actor in the stage and then directing, producing, and eventually managing large performing arts centers. I was getting to the end of my career and was frankly a little burned out in doing that, particularly post-pandemic when all of live performance just blew up because of the shutdown, but then also the emergence of streaming and the preponderance of that really getting people stuck on the couch had a tremendously negative effect on live performance, convening people, selling tickets, etc. So was doing everything I could to help stay present with that, and at the same time was getting pretty fried after so many decades of doing that. I was taking the first vacation that I'd taken in a long time. I was sitting on a beach with my wife and my cell phone rang, and it was a colleague who had been for quite a long time in the role, president and general manager at KNKX on a broadcast basis, serves Western Washington, but on a digital basis, serves worldwide alongside our HD station, which is Jazz 24, which streams worldwide with 24-hour jazz music. This phone rings, and I'm on vacation, so I asked permission from my wife. Can I interrupt our vacation and have this conversation? I don't hear from this guy very often, so I ought to do that. Sure. And he proceeded to tell me he was retiring and he thought that I should apply for the job. And I said, "You're crazy. What do I know about public media?" He explained and convinced me. And because of where I was at in my 35-year career in the performing arts, I said, okay. And I threw my hat in the ring and had a great experience of navigating through 7 interviews and
Wow.
a lot of competition for the job. And I landed the job, and I have been having an absolute blast doing what I'm doing. A lot of people said, "Oh my God, isn't this out of the frying pan and into the fire?" Because radio is in decline, it's struggling. Then public media is under threat. This was in basically my first day with KNKX was October of 2024. President Trump hadn't been elected yet, but there was concern. And then by November, he had been elected, and by his inauguration, he was putting a target on public media. And I'll tell you more down the road.
Yeah.
So I took this role on, and I said, no, it's not really out of the frying pan into the fire. It's more like the frying pan into the saute pan. It's been a set of changes and challenges. There was a lot about nonprofit management that was the same, managing a public media company versus a performing arts company, very similar in many ways, both content driven and both an ever changing flow of content that needed to be constantly curated and managed. And there was enough difference in sort of the technology between the two that I had a lot to learn. So it was energizing, and it's been a great experience. So I'm thrilled to now be running a public media corporation.
I am curious, to be burned out, and now the word I'm hearing is energized. What makes the biggest change from the burnout and where you were to a lot of the same problems? You're still in the fire. How's your energy level and what are those elements?
It's a really good question. I think everybody might answer that differently. For me, the difference was in the performing arts, because I had been doing it so long, I didn't see a lot of new pathways to help break through the system. Maybe because I was a dinosaur, and as many new techniques as I would try, because my agency started to move a little bit away from fixed seats into more of a immersive experience for the audience with digital exhibits and presentations that were somewhat participatory for the audience. We thought, oh, well, there's a new direction. That'll work. And it did for a while, and then it collapsed because the market, in a way, got saturated with digital exhibitions. No matter what we were doing in the performing arts, I wasn't really connecting and breaking through in the ways that we had as a performing arts organization historically. Whereas coming into this new zone, because the radio station serves all of Western Washington, because it had been going for 60 years, it had a super strong base of support that was loving what the station was doing. It gave a platform of stability to be able to bring new ideas. And because I wasn't a dinosaur to public media, I could think out of the box a little bit and bring new ways of seeing things. That's where the energy came from, and that's what healed the burnout.
Wow, that's outstanding. There's so much to that because you had the learning curve, but you saw new opportunities. Coming in with that fresh set of eyes sounds like it really benefited. There's so many pieces to this.
Sure.
What makes KNKX unique?
Well, in public media, generally, there are stations that are all news, and they really own that waterfront. And we have a fellow public media station in the Seattle market that is all news. And they have built up an audience base that is massive and important, and their news consumers are devoted to what they do. There are also public media stations that are singularly focused on music. That we have a wonderful public media station, actually two or more, but two prominent media stations in the Seattle market that are music focused, one classical and one sort of independent rock station. And they're both phenomenal at what they do, and they have a great audience support. KNKX historically, for now 60 years almost, took the middle path. They said, look, we don't want to be all of one thing, because what do you know? Human beings aren't all of one thing. Maybe what we could do is have a dual format. KNKX during drive time, which are mornings between roughly 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. and the afternoons between 3 to 6 p.m., that's where we have our news. And we are an NPR affiliate, so we carry NPR programs and the NPR news magazines in those windows. And we interstitially bring local and regional news, because we have a set of reporters and news leaders within our team, and stitch both international, national, local, regional news into that NPR news magazine. Then for all of the other hours, we have jazz, blues, and sort of cutting edge jazz, cutting edge funk, R&B, some hip hop, etc. during all the other hours. On the weekends, we bring in a couple of other programs. Wait, Don't Tell Me from NPR, This American Life from PRX. Monday through Friday in the evenings, we bring in fresh air. So that is a lovely thing because as
Yeah.
news media has gotten so intense and 24/7, in my way of thinking, it's a bit of an addiction that I don't think is always healthy. We get into these jags that stay on the same story and just rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat
Hmm.
until a place where we're just completely exhausted by the news cycle. Our approach fits, maybe not for everybody, but fits for a lot of people, balancing that need to know and that sense of connecting to music, the human side of music, the joy, the spirit, the
Yeah.
uplift, and even sometimes the sadness and the heartbreak of music. That's what it means to be human. What we're doing is balancing those two in one station, keeping our audience engaged, but not burning them out. It's been working, and we are seeing through some of the methods that we're taking on now a growth and a change and an energizing of our audience.
Yeah, that's really important. As a
Yeah.
public radio leader, what's your responsibility for shaping the media? Not just like reporting on stuff, but building a healthier, stronger community. What do you see your role in that?
Well, there's been a lot of research over the last 18 months to 2 years asking the community writ large in the United States, what's missing, what is needed significantly because of the shrinking and ongoingly shrinking of local news reporting. Local
Yeah.
newspapers need that the community is telling us is more local news, please. That's where I think we have an opportunity and where KNKX is really, we're in the midst of some fundraising around that work right now, about a $6.6 million capacity building drive that will help us move in new directions, specifically to help uplift regional news gathering and news sharing across all of our platforms. Because as I mentioned, we're on broadcast. We serve all of Western Washington. We have one of the biggest broadcast reaches in the state of Washington, from the Canadian border to the Oregon border, from, as we like to say, the coast to the Cascades. All of Western Washington, that's about 6.5 million people, are available to us. We think we have a greater responsibility now than ever to try and reach and serve and be relevant to those communities. We haven't always been. We've been focused on where the concentration of population is, which is in the central Puget Sound region, which would include Seattle, Tacoma, Bellevue. But there's a lot of people out between the borders. Our effort in this new drive is to focus on creating a sustainable news gathering system outside of the central Puget Sound region, and then creating a platform within our broadcast window, which will be coming to soon, that will allow us to really energize and focus people so that we have a water cooler in the afternoons where the community can gather and talk and listen and engage across the state. That is a keen responsibility of public media. We don't have advertisers as we think of advertising. We're not interrupted every 3 minutes with a bombardment of high sell, high push advertising. In fact, we're banned from our FCC licensing from doing so. That's
Mm.
actually an advantage of public media, and it builds a sense of trust and independence as news gatherers. We need to lean into that more. We need to make sure, as I'm talking about Western Washington, by the way, which is blue, purple, and red politically up and down the I-5 corridor here, we need to be having some trust building in saying the news that we are gathering and the news that we are sharing does not have a political agenda. We are not activist journalists. We are not advocating for X, Y, or Z in our news telling. Instead, we are mirroring our communities. It may be mirroring political events from a conservative community, political events from a very liberal community. We don't care. What
Mm.
is important to us is that we're reflecting what's going on and that the community of listeners can hear and bridge and listen and think about and consider, rather than being told these issues are divisive, you should sit on this side of the fence, not on that one, and really trust and have respect for the listeners enough to be able to sort out what they believe and how they feel based on what's going on. So that's where I think some of the responsibilities are for public media these days. We don't have a paywall. Everybody's welcome. We're not selling digital data as social media companies do out into the world. No, that's not our purpose. Our purpose is to convene community and to engage in the civic dialogue and the social dialogue and the cultural dialogue of our region and try to help reflect and uplift.
There's so many words I want to highlight. And of course, you use the word responsibility multiple times. I love that you see the weight of responsibility that you do have. I wanted to highlight a few other words. You use the word bridge, and that's such a beautiful word, right? Because it really does connect two things that are completely separated. And in our society today, there's sometimes a pretty big chasm between, but the idea of being a bridge, your responsibility to be accurate, but with respect and really engage in the culture, engage in the different pieces. The weight of that, as you were talking, it's just like that's a heavy weight. And yet, wow, you're giving to the whole something that is unfortunately has been really ripped apart in these days. And the question I have around that is, what do you think that media, especially like news media, has contributed to maybe division, even if unintentionally?
I don't think it's been unintentional. I think that media, and I would include social media and digitally based companies in that definition, the profit incentive behind dividing, behind logarithmic definitions of people and defining them and putting them into certain demographic buckets and belief buckets, and then finding ways to either speak into that echo chamber or turn up the heat and elevate the issues, have been profitable. And there's a whole bunch of drive and reason behind that profit that I think has put the the worldwide public, but we could speak to just the American public as the frogs in the pot. Slowly but surely, the heat has been turned up, and we haven't been always conscious of what's gone on around us. And I think we need to own that, and we need to own being individually responsible to say, hey, wait a minute. I am not a commodity to be sold, and the air that I breathe should not be contaminated. The media that I take in should not be contaminated in a manner that commoditizes me as the consumer to such a degree that I don't have a say in this. I think we need to own our individual responsibility, and we need to get our heads up out of that pot enough to say, oh, wait a minute, the world is bigger than that. There are other resources out there. I do get to better curate what's coming at me and how my world is being managed. That's where I think nonprofits in general are good resources. They may not be total resources. I'm not saying that everything that's out in the commercial media is bad, but I am saying we need to clear our heads as consumers so that we can be more judicious in how we are managing our media diet, that we're sick. We're not healthy anymore. And so we've got to own our own health. We've got to own being an advocate for our own consumption of media, news, arts, entertainment, and do a better job of owning what we're putting into our heads, so that we better manage our choices, so that we have clearer thinking. And oh, by the way, in better managing those choices, we realize when we look around, that other person, they're just like me. They're not that much different. They care about many of the same things that I care about. It's just that we've been put into these oppositional boxes. That's all we can see is the opposition instead of the connection. Public media is different, And we have a chance to at least shine a light on these issues and create an alternative path.
I think that's very, very well said, David. Even the algorithms that are put on, so they know what to feed us. I like the idea that as an individual, we have our own responsibility to look at. I've actually started going back and like listening to C-SPAN and all those things, which are incredibly boring, but I need to know what they said, not what someone said that they said.
Not letting what they said be defined by somebody else with an agenda that has nothing to do with what was said, which is how most political information comes to us.
What I heard you say, if I had to paraphrase, is there's motivation to manipulate. As I was talking to someone with the Austin Philharmonic, and I asked, what is it about the arts that's so great? And it's that similar thing that you might be sitting right next to someone who, if you saw what they were scrolling on their phone right before, you'd probably have an argument with them. But instead, you're sitting there in our humanness, or listening or watching something that attaches to the person, to that cultural connection, rather than the enemy.
In everything we do, the arts and artists, primarily in music for us, but also because people's cultural diet isn't just music. KNKX also focuses on being a partner for museums and theaters and dance organizations and everything you can think of, because we really believe that when you engage with artists, you are being invited into somebody else's worldview. There is something so beautiful about seeing it, the world through a different prism, and then being invited in. That means that we are opening up our sense of connection to others, opening up the empathetic parts of what it means to be human and going, that is so cool. I hadn't thought about looking at life that way, but that really touches me. And it opens up my heart and it opens up my mind to realize we are all in this together. And that, like you said in the film, I'm sitting next to somebody, I don't know who they are, but we're having the same experience. It happens to be going through this artist, but then reflected back to us, elbow to elbow with that person. That's what the importance of convening community is all about. And then we get to talk and consider, what did we just see? What did we experience? What was that like for you? I think the same is with film, too. So we think that's really important. That's why the dual format of our radio station is so important to us, because we get to mix and create this wonderful stew of culture and what's happening together. They're both very human.
That's well said. And sometimes I look at, I'll read history and I'll go, how did that happen? How could they have done that to these people? And it's when you take that person and have them stop being a human. Once they're a bug, you can squish a bug, but once you see them as a person, then that's where that empathy comes and that compassion. And what a different world it is when we can sit side by side with someone and maybe even learn how to have conversation.
I think, unfortunately, the worst of the media has been programming us to write off and dismiss and or become completely antagonistic to the other instead of curious, instead of open, instead of realizing, you know what, we may have different opinions. You can have yours and I can have mine. And that doesn't mean we're in a do or die battle. It just means we can have differences of opinions, but it also means that we could explore, where are we connected? Where are there opportunities to work together? One of the things my news director, who's amazing, is focused on is this idea of solutions-oriented journalism. And it's an area where we're going to be leaning more and more into, and that is, we don't have to be the breaking news program. We don't have to be telling stories that just repeat the struggle and the problem over and over and over again. Instead, we could be searching around our region to say, look, hey, down in Tacoma, they were having this problem with homelessness, and they tried this experiment and it worked. And so why don't we look at that and tell that story of success and share that across the region so that we can all learn and lean into elevating successes. the more we do that, the more that sense of healing, that sense of openness to potential problem solving is going to change. Our brains are wired. I know this is completely irrationally exuberant on my part, but I feel like there's an opportunity. If we can just little by little by little show how we can rewire the way communities think and operate, we may get somewhere.
I love that. Like, rewire, I always think of neuroplasticity, right? That our brain, a part of your brain breaks, you'll build new connections.
That's right.
And neuroplasticity stops when we die. Like it continues. I don't care if you're 90 years old, but I love that idea of putting that almost that term on community. And
Solutions oriented.
yeah, because it's like there is fractures and there are different visions, but that doesn't have to be the stopping place. We can rebuild those connections, and the plasticity of a community will show the difference between one that kind of keeps the hate and one that keeps the I want to see you as a human. I want to understand your values. I always try to start with values. I do that in teaching teams and building team community, but I also do it when I'm confronted with someone that has a very different opinion than me because I can get mad, but my curiosity is why do they believe that? And once you get to the value of it, it could be that this person over here, which thinks very different from me, actually has a similar value. It's just interpreted it very differently or translated. Let's do neuroplasticity communities. David, I want to be mindful of our time. If you had to tell an everyday leader, not just the media or institutions, what role do they play in restoring connection and building trust, what would you tell us?
Well, I do think that nonprofits have a important and unique role that we all need to be promoting and making clear to our constituents that we are different than the for-profit world. You know, our founding mothers and fathers set up a system where there were three legs to the stool. There was a government leg, there was a company and for-profit private sector leg. And then there was this third leg that was nonprofits, which really started as churches and then evolved over time to be the world that we're in. As nonprofit leaders, remind folks that we are a different sector and that we have a different set of purpose and it distinguishes our work. And we should continually try and elevate that. Now, it also puts different standards on us, and we need to make sure that we're living by those standards at a very high, for lack of a better phrase, moral code that we hold ourselves accountable to. People who aren't in the nonprofit world, maybe who are in the government world, I think in very similar ways, they have responsibilities for accountability, transparency, and public service that are, as I say, very similar to the nonprofit, and those need to be elevated. Unfortunately, we're in a current zone where a lot of those values and the restrictions and boundaries that we've always lived by in government are being eroded. I hope we can rebuild those and redefine those because I think boundaries and accountability and transparency is really healthy. So let's get into the health of our community. And then in the profit zone, you know, I support that we are a marketplace. I support that we are a capitalistic society. But that doesn't mean that there also aren't boundaries to respect there. And we shouldn't be tearing down the guardrails around profit making. Our country worked successfully generations and generations, respecting these ideas of boundaries, roles, stay in your lane, and mine your lane for success. That doesn't mean that you get to completely keep up the traffic metaphor, go off-roading and erode the environments around you. So I know that's a bit of a fuzzy metaphor, so sorry about that, but you kind of hopefully get what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So I hope that we can get to a place where business writ large, profit, government, nonprofit, leverage their strengths in their particular zones and can cooperate and work together.
Very well said. and we do need all of them to be healthy, and we play different roles. Thank you for that, David. Thank you for time. I love your heart, your empathy
Thank you.
comes out not only in your bio, but also just in all of your words. So
Well,
thank you very much.
thank you. I appreciate the chance to talk to you and your podcast consumers out in the world. Thank you for taking the time to bring me in. I appreciate it.
Great. And thanks for listening to What Works with Marla Moody. Until next time, keep leading with clarity, developing your team, and discovering what works. I love that you use that word bridge, and I'm gonna noodle around with the neuroplasticity